Hello everybody and welcome to another Galaxy of Heroes video. I am Sanjita and today I am going to be doing something a little different. I am making my own customized ranking of every faction in Galaxy of Heroes in tier list format. I don't like how standard tier lists look with lack of color, lack of distinction, so I made my own using lightsaber crystal colors as the ranking system. But in order to keep things clear, I've labeled it. So a black crystal would be S tier, blue crystal would be A tier, red crystal is B tier, green C, purple D, and then white, silver, whatever you want to call it, is F. Because everyone doesn't know all the factions by heart, I have them in alphabetical order on the right, and I'll be going through them top to bottom one at a time. So the first faction we're going to go through is 501st. And the 501st lands at near the top of B tier. Now I'm going through all these factions and evaluating them based on general power, quality of the faction. I'm not counting ships, so it is just going to be the normal base game across any game mode really. I'm not going to pay particular attention to any game mode, but PvP is probably higher up on the ranking than PvE or anything like that. And also the general depth of a faction can help hurt it as well. So the 501st is a great faction. After the great nerf of 2021, General Skywalker is pretty much stuck with his clones, which helps the faction a lot whenever they're in play. But since it is so small, it is going to be a B tier for now. The next faction is Bad Batch, and I have put them towards the middle of C tier. It's a great faction, but it is small and limited because with only 5 characters, there's only so much you can do. But this team is an offensive powerhouse and it can do so many things on offense, and on defense sometimes it can get some use, but usually you want to add Shock T if you're putting on defense, which I wouldn't advise either way. So the next faction up is Bounty Hunters, and the Bounty Hunters are landing near the top of A tier. I know there's a lot of Bounty Hunter fans out there, and until about last week they probably would not be this high, but with the introduction of Galactic Legend Jabba the Hutt, the Bounty Hunter faction now has its own Galactic Legend, taking it to a new level. Before then, it had a lot of use with the Bosk team. Fennec Shand is amazing, Jango Fett is amazing, the Mandalorian, Grief Karga, but Jabba the Hutt takes this to the next level, and we have yet to see the full potential of this team going forward. The next faction is Clone Troopers, and since the Clone Troopers encapsulate the entire Bad Batch except for Omega, well no, Omega is Clone Trooper, she's not Galactic Republic. It encapsulates the entire Bad Batch, so it does have to go a little higher. And the Clone Troopers at large do have a little extra to offer. They have the 501st clones, but without General Skywalker, they can't do nearly as much. But still, very high quality faction, so they do merit the top spot in the C tier. The next faction we're going to look at is Droids. And the Droids are going to be landing towards the end of B tier. Now this is a great faction. Mostly what comes to mind at first is Separatist droids, General Grievous as the leader, but they also have a lot to offer at this time other than a Grievous team. They have some plug and play like C-3PO, R2-D2, BB-8 can do a lot on a full droid team, and also with the introduction of Shorty, there's another very strong team in the mix for droids. Dark Trooper as well doesn't play with droids himself, but he's a very strong attacker in the Imperial Trooper lineup, and L337 is a very great plug-and-play tank. The next faction, one of the larger factions, is Empire, and that is coming in at the top of the A tier. The Empire has so much to offer. You could probably make an argument that it's S tier, but I wanted to keep things pretty spread out, and I didn't want the S tier crowded, and I think the other factions that are going in S tier are definitely deserving of it. The Empire is great. It has its own Galactic Legend and Lord Vader, although he does need some outside help to make his team run with an unaligned Force user that isn't Empire. But they got Emperor Palpatine, Darth Vader, Mara Jade, all in the Imperial Troopers. They have the
Hello there. like and subscribe.
And next up we have the Ewoks, and if you can guess, they are not a great faction. In Galaxy of Heroes, they are one of the worst factions, so they sit squarely in the F tier, second from the top, so there will be some after them, so they're not the absolute worst faction in the game, but Ewoks are terrible. There's not much use to be had with them, even with an Omicron on Chief Chirpa. They don't really see much play at the top level of the game. In this faction, this tier list is focused more on the end game of things and the absolute potential of each faction. So Ewoks just don't have much to offer. Next up is First Order, and the First Order is coming in at the bottom of A tier. Now some people might think they should go higher, some might think they should go lower. They are pretty dependent on just Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, which is why I wouldn't put them that much higher. But since he is there, he is an amazing character on his own, and the rest of the First Order just makes him better. And in Grand Arena, you can make a couple teams out of it if you have the First Order TIE Pilot Omicron, but this is a very strong faction overall, and if we were including ships, maybe it could get even higher. The next faction is Galactic Republic, and you may have guessed it, this is our first S tier faction. Galactic Republic is amazing. It's coming in at number 2 overall out of all factions, and I'm sure some would argue that it should be in the number 1 slot. But with one Galactic Legend, it is very high ranking. It's an awesome faction. You got Jedi Master Kenobi, you got Commander Tano, you have the whole 501st, all of Clone Troopers except Omega. So you got Gas there. With the Mace reworked, he's a powerhouse of his own. You got Padme Amidala. You just got so much here to work with, including the absolute best team in the game right now, which is Jedi Master Kenobi and Commander Tano. The next faction up is Geonosians, and the Geonosians are our first D tier faction. This is a small faction. It's only 5 characters. Maybe they get another one later. Who knows? But this faction has kind of fallen from grace in the past few years. It hit its peak in probably 2019 when it got the reworks for Geonosis Territory Battle and Geonosian Brood Alpha came out. But right now there's not a whole lot you can beat with just pure Geonosians, and they don't have much value in PvE either. I will say they are an overpowered early game faction. If you level up Geobrood Alpha to just level 72 and get his leadership ability up to that point, you get plus 15,000 health and protection on all characters, no matter what. So they could be Gear 1 and they're going to have 30,000 hit points basically, which is insane in the early game. Next faction is the newest one, and that is Hut Cartel. This is harder to play since it's so new, and it's very small relatively. But seeing as they have a Galactic Legend, you can only put them so low. But they do belong at least in the B tier. I know it's lower than the First Order, and they have similar traits, but right now it's just kind of unproven to me. And other than the core Jabba the Hutt team, I don't see much value here. It's just a bunch of random scrap bounty hunters and like Mob Enforcer, Gam Guard, not much going on there. I know there's a lot of people that love Embo, but I think this was the best that could come out. Now, Hut Cartel versus 501st, I don't know if 501st can win, but I still would like to see more out of this faction before I would be able to rank it higher. But let me know what you think. Alright, next faction up is the Imperial Remnant. Very small faction, which is one of the biggest reasons it's landing in the D tier right now, towards the bottom. There's not much you can do with just Imperial Remnant. Although Moff Gideon is amazing, Dark Trooper is amazing. That's probably why they don't go in the F tier. But there's not much you can do with just Imperial Remnant alone. So that's why I can't justify putting them much higher than this. And right after Imperial Remnant comes Imperial Troopers. And this is a fan favorite in the Galaxy of Heroes community. They've fallen on tough times, I think, recently, but I still think they merit at least B tier, lower B tier, right before droids. So with the Imperial Trooper faction, you got two great teams with the standard leadership Imperial Trooper team and the Iden Versio Trooper team. And both of them are amazing in Grand Arena, although sometimes as an offensive team, there's not much damage you can find with standard Imperial Troopers nowadays. So maybe you could argue they'd go lower, although I think I have them where they belong. I'd love to put them higher, but right now I don't think that would be feasible for them. Alright, next up we got the second newest faction in the game, the Inquisitorious, and they are landing in the lower C tier. Now, I actually think this is a pretty strong faction. You can't just take anything against it and win. You really need a plan as long as they have their full strength with the Grand Inquisitor, even outside of Territory Wars where he has the Omicrons. But overall, I don't think it has much to push it very high. I definitely wouldn't put it past Bad Batch or Clone Troopers or Droids, so that's why it's landing here right now. And it could get better with the introduction of Reva in the new territory battle, but that is yet to be seen. Alright, next up we got Jawas, and some people might not be happy about this, but they are coming in at the top of the F tier. I'll move myself over here for that. So the Jawas, they just don't have much going on. They're not really used much, and although people, they do have a fan following, I'm sure Arnold would chafe at the thought of them in the F tier. But they are so weak that their main asset was originally a bug in Scavenger's Kit, which was only discovered because it was pretty much a hard counter to Geonosians when all those swarm attacks came and they just stacked up thermal detonators. And this is how bad they are. The developers didn't have a problem with it at all. They actually rewrote the kit so that the bug was the functionality. And that is why I'd say they are so bad. Next up, we have the Jedi, and I'm sure you may have guessed it, but the Jedi is coming in as the top faction. The Jedi are amazing. They have 2 Galactic Legends, they got General Skywalker, they got Jedi Knight Revan, Jedi Knight Luke, Yoda, General Kenobi. They have so much to offer. And you might say a lot of the best Jedi are Galactic Republic, but the Jedi faction, aside from Galactic Republic, has so much to offer as well. And they have 2 Galactic Legends, 2 of my favorites. I'd probably say Jedi Master Luke Skywalker is actually my favorite Galactic Legend at this point, but this faction is just so strong. I wouldn't put anything else at this top slot, and that, I think, is how it should be in Star Wars. The Jedi should be on top. Alright, and next up we have the Mandalorians, and they are landing towards the top of the C tier. Now, the Mandalorians had a rocky start to their existence. It was kind of a joke faction. Nothing would work for them. Brought in the Armor as a lead, Bo-Katan as a lead, but they didn't get anywhere until Maul came in the game. And with Maul, they are definitely a force to be reckoned with. You could probably argue that they should go ahead of Clone Troopers, or maybe even Droids, but I don't think they're as deep as those factions. So I think top of C tier is best for them. Maul is amazing. Armor has great plug-and-play viability. The Mandalorian Beskar Armor actually has great usage, even though I would argue he's one of the more lackluster Hero's Journey characters. It is still a very solid faction. Next up, we have the Night Sisters, and whereas they once were a great faction, they have somewhat fallen from grace, so they are right now in the D tier. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Night Sisters, but at the end game, there's not much for them to do right now. They used to just be kind of a Grievous counter, and that still can happen in Territory Wars if your opponents are setting Grievous, but since Grievous is more of an offensive character now, they really don't have as much to do. And they do see, probably the best use for Night Sisters is putting Zombie and Daka with SLKR right now for cheesing, but that is going outside the faction, so that doesn't help them in this ranking. Alright, next up we have Old Republic, and though it kind of hurts me to say, they are D tier. They are top of the D tier, even considering Jedi Knight Revan, Jolee, and Bastila. On their own, an Old Republic Jedi team cannot do much. It cannot beat much. I wouldn't trust it really against Bad Batch or Inquisitorious for a good win. And the Old Republic team under Karth is just about as garbage as they come. If I was just ranking that team, this would definitely be an F tier. But the Old Republic Jedi helped them out. Shorty and T3M4 also have some good use as droids in a droid team, but since they require other droids to make that work, that's not really coming into my consideration. Next up, we got the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is near and dear to my heart because it was how I unlocked Palpatine and Thrawn, but they are F tier. There's just not much you can do with them on their own. Ezra can have some use if he's built up strong enough when you pair him with other Jedi, and maybe Kanan can as well. I'd kind of like to see more added to the Phoenix faction, to see it developed or get some reworks or something for more PvP-oriented modes. But as it stands right now, they're one of the worst factions, and I don't know if you could argue against that. Alright, next up we have the Rebel Fighters. And it might surprise some, but they are bottom of the D tier. But you might say, wait, Mon Mothma's great, that team's great. The team under Admiral Raddus is great as well. You got two great teams there. Until you realize those two leaders are not rebel fighters themselves. They're just rebels. So without them, this faction is almost entirely leaderless, unless you count Wedge or Jin, and that's not really beating much of anything. Maybe you could argue that they should go in front of Imperial Remnant, but given the plug-and-play value of Moff Gideon and the strength of Dark Trooper, I just opted to keep them below that faction. Alright, next up we have the second biggest faction in the game, and a favorite for a lot of people, the Rebels. And they are falling mid-A tier. Now, some people might say this is kind of snubbing them, putting them below bounty hunters. And they do have a lot. They have so much going on, but they don't have a galactic legend. Even so, I think you could make an argument to put them ahead of bounty hunters. But right now, their strongest team is the CLS team, which is amazing. They have the Rogue One and the Mon Mothma teams, which are very strong and situational. But I don't think their second and third acts are strong enough to put them that far up. The next faction we have is the Resistance. And the Resistance is coming in lower A tier, just ahead of First Order. Now, they have a Galactic Legend, which is Rey. I think she's amazing. That's why they get up this high. I'm sure some would argue that First Order is better. But I do think you have a better chance at making two solid teams with just Resistance, and plus C-3PO, R2-D2, and BB-8 kind of add that plug-and-play viability that go with other factions that make the Resistance a more valuable faction, in my opinion. And next up, we got the Rogue One faction, which until recently, with the introduction of Admiral Raddus, I'd probably put squarely in the F tier. But with Admiral Raddus, it's a very solid team, especially if you develop them to the point you need for the profundity. And that's why I think it at least merits getting the bottom of the C tier. I don't know how the exact matchup works out, but I would take them over the Old Republic Jedi team, Night Sisters, Geonosians, or anything else below them. So that's why they come in at the bottom of C tier. But without Admiral Raddus, definitely would probably be F tier. Alright, next up we have the largest faction in the game, the Scoundrels. And this faction is huge. And I am putting that in the middle of the A tier. Now this is the highest ranked faction other than Rebels that does not have a galactic legend. But it is up this high just because of its depth, pretty much. But it does have a lot of strength across the board. It has most bounty hunters, except Jawa. Jawa is not here, otherwise it might push it ahead of Rebels and definitely ahead of bounty hunters. But the presence of the Galactic Legend keeps bounty hunters above Scoundrels. But they have Commander Ahsoka Tano, they got Dash, Fennec. They got so many things that happen here. It's got a lot of the Smugglers, you got IG and Queel, Han and Chewie, just a very deep faction. You got Canderous, Newt, L3, just so many things to go here, and that's why they go up high. Is it too high? I don't know. Some people might think it should be even higher, but I could see a lot of people arguing for lower. Next up, we have the Separatists. And the Separatist heyday was in 2019, and they haven't had much development since then. So they are in the lower B tier right now. Still a strong faction, but I'm not kidding when I say they have received essentially zero development since 2019. The core of the Separatist faction is a General Grievous team, but then you also have a Newt Count Dooku team you can make. You got Geonosians, and Wat Tambor is one of the best plug-and-play characters of the game. He is essential, and that's what helps them get so high right now. They also have Jango Fett, which under Newt or another Separatist leader starts out very strong with that damage immunity and can be a force of nature all by himself. Next up, we got one of my favorites, the Sith Empire. And the Sith Empire is coming in at the top of the B tier in this list. So the Sith Empire is one of the smaller factions. It's got basically one team you can use at a time, but with the introduction of Darth Malgus, I would argue they are stronger than the 501st. Whether they could beat a Jawa team, Hut Cartel, I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that matchup, but I guess it's possible. We could see. But Darth Malgus and Sith Empire cause so many problems. If you have them on defense in Grand Arena, they're essentially like a Galactic Legend team, and you almost need a Galactic Legend team of your own to take them out in full 5s. 3v3, he's also a mess, and in 3v3, you got two very solid teams now with Sith Empire. Next up, we have the Sith, and the Sith, rightly, is an S tier faction. It's surprisingly a pretty small faction considering its importance in the Star Wars universe. I would love to see this faction expanded with more characters from the expanded Star Wars universe, but with two Galactic Legends, the entirety of Sith Empire minus HK, Darth Talon, the Sith Trio with Traya, and now the Savage Oppress Omicron. This faction is super strong. I definitely think it merits S tier, though I wouldn't put it over Jedi or Galactic Republic, and you'd have a hard time of convincing me to do that as well. Next up, we have the Smugglers, and it might be surprising that they're this high. They're the middle of B tier, but that is also because of the introduction of Jabba the Hutt. It is a Smuggler, which helps boost this faction up. Otherwise, they have Dash, got Han and Chewie, L337, they got Nest, so they have a lot to work with. However, without Jabba, they would go nowhere near this high. They'd probably be a C tier faction, but Jabba definitely helps them out here. Next up, we have the Tuscans, and the Tuscans are the worst faction in the game. There are only 3 characters. They're essentially useless. The Omicron for Tuscan Raider might bring some viability in 3v3 Grand Arena, but even then it's just a joke. They don't have a full team. They only have 3 characters. Until they bring in the characters from Book of Boba Fett, there's not going to change. They are going to be the laughingstock of the game for a long time. And last, but certainly not least, we have Unaligned Force Users. Unaligned Force User is kind of a quirky faction. It sounds like a joke. It's a huge mouthful. Some of the members are clearly Jedi, but they're just labeled as Unaligned Force Users. Or maybe not clearly, but I'd say one, it's hard to argue, is not a Jedi. But they are landing in the S tier. Now, I don't know if anyone would argue against this, but when you look at who they actually have, this is an incredibly strong faction. They have 2 Galactic Legends in Rey and Kylo. They got Maul, they got Commander Ahsoka Tano, they got Commander Luke, they have all the Inquisitors, they got Star Killer and Mara Jade. They just have so much to offer, and what's really holding, they could probably beat out Sith, but what's holding them back is they don't have a lot of continuity within the faction. It's just a lot of solo axe, essentially. Even Starkiller, kind of the king of unaligned force users. You can't run him with just an unaligned force user team. You're limited to 2, one light side, one dark side, or the team doesn't really work. I mean, you need Jedi and Sith outside help to really make it work. But that's it. That's the entire faction. That's the entire tier list. Every faction ranked. The Jedi being the best, Tuscans being the worst. And let me know what you think. Let me know who you think should be higher, who should be lower, who did I get super wrong, or let me know if you agree. I find this a lot of fun. Let me know if there's any other rankings you want me to do. But that's it for today. This is Sanjita signing off.